We'll do a review of Likutei Sichos in Chelik Yud Ches, the second Sicha for the Parshas Naso. This is a Rashi Sicha, and the Rebbe is going to explain a Rashi in the Sheni of the Parshas Naso, but this is an all-encompassing Sicha. The Rebbe will explain it according to Pshutos Shel Mikra, many of the different languages which is used by the Bnei Kahos versus the Bnei Gershom and Benurari, and the different avodas. So many beautiful details and so many aspects of the parsha are going to be explained b'derech agav, and that is going to explain the question that the Rebbe has in the Rashi. And so let's go look inside. But in the pasuk, as you see, this pasuk, this parsha, discusses the different numbers, the different counts of the Bnei Levi. So the pasuk starts Nosei Esreish Bnei Gershom. In the parshas Bamidbar, the Torah says to count the Bnei Kahos, and the Bnei Kahos basically they carried the kelim of the Mishkan. Over here, the pasuk says Nasi to count the Bnei Gershon Gamheim, and over there the Torah says also from 30 years until 50, so that those who do the work, and it tells you exactly what the work is going to be of the Bnei Gershon, and then he goes to the Bnei Merari. Again, Bnei Merari, you count them from 30 years old, and the different things that they carried, and Zois Avoidas of the Mishpachos Bnei Merari. So we have each one of the families separate. So then the pasuk says, "Vayiyu v'ivked Moshe v'Aaron v'Nesio Eidos Bnei HaKahasi." They counted the Kahasi and their number, how much they came to, and then the Sheni. It goes to continue the Pekudei Bnei Gershon, how much they came out to, then the Pekudei Bnei Merari. So these are individual families of the Levi. Then finally in Pasuk Memhei, the Pasuk says, Eile Pekudei Mishpachos Bnei Merari, Asher Pokad Moshe V'Arna Pe Hashem B'Yad Moshe. That concludes the Bnei Merari. And the pasuk Memvav, the pasuk says, "Kol hapekudim asher pogad Moshe va'Aaron u'nisias ha'Yisrael salavim the mishpachos l'beis Elohim." The total number of all that were counted, and they were counted mi ben shloshim shana v'malo v'ad ben chamishim shana. So the pasuk says, "Kol habo lavoid avoidas avoida v'avoidas masa boil moed." All those that came to serve avoidas avoida and to serve carrying the oil moed. So what exactly? So this is in the summation to sum up all the work that was done by the three families of the Levim, as mentioned earlier. So we're saying that anybody, all those that came, they were 30 years old to do what? To serve avoidas avoida, the service of avoida, v'avoidas masa, and the service of carrying. And Rashi brings down what is avoidas avoida, what is the avoida of avoida. So Rashi, hu hashir b'mitzaltayim. This is the song that the Levim sing with the mitzaltayim. That's with the cymbals, when you bang two things together. That's called the mitzaltayim. Viki noires, those are the harp. And we'll see exactly, the Rebbe will describe what these different instruments, how they work. But this song that the Levim, that they used the mitzaltayim, and they used the kinoiris, and they would do that when the korbanos, the avodah of the korbanos of the kohanim, they would sing and they would use the mitzoltayim and the kinoides. So this was a service to another service, lavoida acheres, to another service. The avoida acheres is the korbanos. That's the avoida. But this avoida of singing served as a service to the avoida acheres, to another avoida korbanos. And then Rashi further says, avoida smasa means to carry kemashmoy. Look at the Sicha. Zog the Rebbe, noch Aleph. Nachdem wie der Posik der zählt, after the Posik relates, wie man hat gezählt die Bnei Kohos, how the sons of Kos were counted. So the Torah talks about Bnei Gershon or Bnei Merari. That's in this parsha, the parsha of Naso. We talk about the Bnei Gershon, Bnei Merari. The Bnei Kohos was in the previous parsha. So when we tell Bnei Kohos, Bnei Gershon, Bnei Merari, it sums it up. So it says, Kol habo latzovo la'avoda b'oil moed, all that come to the army to work in the oil moed. Zog der Posik. So then the Posik sums it up. Kol ha'pikudi masher pokad Moshe goimer mi ben shloshim goimer. So all the numbers that Moshe counted, starting from 30 years, ba'ad ben chamishim shana, till 50 years, Kol habo la'avoid avoidas avoida, Avodas Masa, the Pasuk says, all those that came to serve in Avodas Avoda and Avodas Masa, Ba'il Moyed, in the Moyed, Ba'ib Kudem Gomer tells you the number, how much is the total of all the Leviim from the three families of Kos, Gershon, and Merari. Is Rashi Mefarish the Verter, so Rashi explains the words Avodas Avoda. What does it mean, Avodas Avoda? He says, Hu Hashir b'mitzaltayim v'kinoides, that is the song that you use these symbols and you use the harps. Shehi avoida la'avoida acheres. That's a service for another avoida. So basically, what does it mean? So the pasuk says avoidas avoida. Rashi translates that the avoida is for another avoida. The says avoidas avoida meant. What is avoidas? Nit an arbet funana avoida. It doesn't mean a service that you are serving, nor avoida le'avoida. It means a service that you do for another service. There's another service. It's an avoida to libanandar avoida. This is a service for a different service. What does it mean? Und das is avoidas hashir, the service that the Leviim served with their song was is sulib avoidas hakarbonis. So the service that is because for the service of the karbonis. So we have the service of the karbonis, and in order for that service to take place, we need another service. That's the Leviim singing with the Shir Metzaltai. But the Rebbe says, Dapen Farshlein, we have several questions over here. Rashi doesn't say singing with the mouth, which was part of the Avodah. Rashi singles out two Mitzaltai Vikinoides, only two instruments. And why does Rashi B'chlal need to mention anything? We'll see the question, three questions. Dapen Farshlein. So we need to understand. Aleph, number one, the Losh and HaGemoreh, the language in the Gemara, which is their mocker for them, Pirush Rashi, that's the source for this Rashi, is Ezehu Avoida Shetzrich Avoida Have Omer Zushira. Gemara says, what kind of a service that needs another service? So the Gemara says, I would say Zushira. The Pashtus Lashon of the Gemara comes out almost that the Shira, the Avoida is, the Rebbe deals with it in the Oris. The Avoida is the Avoida is actually the Korban. And it's Avoida was the Shir. But in any event, the Gemara says, V'omer Zushira, that what is this Avoida? It's a Shira, which is for the Korban. But in the Gemara, Unesvern nit der Mond kein Nemen von Kleshir. In the Gemara, there is no mention of any instruments. The Gemara just says that this is an Avodah, so it would mean that the Avodas Alavim, there's some Avodas that they did as a service for another service. Or Rashi's Moisim Mitzaltai B'Kinoides. Rashi adds this with the cymbals and the harps. Why is Rashi mentioning this what it doesn't say in the Gemara? Base number 2. Rashi who ashir b'mitzotayim v'kenoros. Why does Rashi, if Rashi wants to say some instruments, why does Rashi specifically bring down the song that you do with these two particular instruments, with the cymbals and the harp? As I there were many other vessels that you used when you served with the song. There was many different vessels, a whole bunch of vessels. The Rebbe is going to explain later on, very interesting, that these particular vessels needed koyach and they needed to be giving away the Rebbe's answer over there, but there's a long arichas here, so just so you get an idea how this is going to approach, that's going to be to this, that the mitzotayim, the kenoides, the Rebbe explains they require extra effort. You need to be koyach ben shloshim ben chamishim. Let's go weiter. So the question is, why does Rashi bring down specifically mitzotayim v'kenoides? Number 3, Gimel. He doesn't mention at all the song in the mouth, which is also answered. The Rebbe says shir b'peh is not something which is difficult. The difficulty is in those specific kenoides that Rashi is trying to explain why you needed 30-year-old for that. But in any event, Rashi brings down the song of 2 instruments. He does not bring down the song, the plain singing. The kushavet noch starker. The question becomes even greater, stronger. When you try to equate this with an actual song that took place, that the child learned already. What's this song? Os Yashir Moshe. We learned earlier, is given Os Yashir Moshe Goyim Alemer. That's a song that took place. Moshe sang to say. What is Leimer? To say the words of Os Yashir. Shir B'peh, those was a song with a mouth. So here Rashi admits the song B'peh, just brings down the avoided the shir. He doesn't bring down the B'peh, just bring down these 2 instruments. So maybe these are the 2 main instruments. But the Rebbe says, "Mikenit zogden as Rashi bringt nor die zwei klei shir." That the reason Rashi brings this specific 2 song instruments, weil sie seinen die klolos die kesugim von alle klei shir. They are the general categories from the various different kinds of instruments that you play with. And this is the general category. Because the Rebbe said that's not the case. Vorum in posik in divrei hayomim, because in the verse, in the divrei hayomim, in divrei hayomim over there, the posik discusses when he built the Mishkan over there. I had the posik here before in divrei hayomim, but in any event, in divrei hayomim the posik says that he prepared the various different levim that they used. So that tells they ein in the Raisugim. It mentions later on there are many more categories, but there's 3 categories. You have nevolim, halu benevel v'chiner ben nevolim. What exactly nevolim is? So in the English they translate it as a lyre, Lyre. But the Rebbe later on in the Sicha explains that a nevel is an instrument in which you blow in, beloshen noid. So basically these are the 3 categories. Nevel is with the mouth in a sounds. A kinoidus is a string instrument, and mitzaltayim is an instrument that you bang with. But these are the 3 categories that in Divrei Yomim, nevertheless, it mentions nevolim, it mentions kinoidus, it mentions these, and mitzaltayim is a maroshach. So if Rashi is talking about categories, or the Rashi Gida bring in aladrai, either should have brought all 3 categories of instruments. Oich nevolim, also the nevolim. Other nor einem als dugma, or just to bring one as a sample. The noch meisiv zayin, and then he would add al derech megefint in divrei yomim. It's similar to what we find in the divrei yomim. Uklei shir mitzaltayim uklei shir, but not to just bring down 2 without referencing anything else and nothing more, and just saying Kineris Mitziltai. It seems like that's lacking in the explanation. The Rebbe in Ois Beis is continuing to ask on the pasuk B'chlal, why did the pasuk find it necessary over here to mention the avodah of singing of the Levim? That's only mentioned much later on in the pasuk, not over here. Why does the Torah find it necessary in the summation of all the work of the Levim to tell us that they did two things? They sang the shir, sang or instruments, and carrying, and doesn't say any of the other avodas that the Levim did. Why is this singled out? Base. Also, we need to understand, let it be true as Loshen HaPosik, avodas avoda, that the language of the verse, avodas avoda, meant shir, that it means shir, avodah avoda, was is avoda, lavoida cheres, that is a service for another service. So this is a service of singing for the avodas hakabonis, as ob nit verstandig in pasuk gufa. But in the verse itself, we don't understand. The pasuk understand. The avodah for shiras havlevim is bizaher noch nit der mond geworden in pasuk. This service of the song of the Levim, till now, this has not yet been mentioned in the verse. As hat sich gerät nur wegen der avodas halevim von trogen der Mishkan. We only discussed the service of the Levim from carrying the Mishkan, and piruk vakomas hamishkan, to taking apart and then raising the Mishkan, und shmiras hamishkan v'hamikdash, and guarding the Mishkan and the Mikdash. Der tzivui of avodas hashir, the command that there is a service of song, the way it's in the simple text of the verse, that's first mentioned in the pasuk of Baloischa. When the pasuk says nisunim nisunim, they're given over, the double lashon that it means nisunim lamasa, they were given for the load, for carrying, and also nisunim l'shiras, Rashi says over there. So that means that that's really the first time that the pasuk mentions that they did the song. Isn't it movement? So it's not understood. My time, what's the reason was da nochun minyan for the Bnei Levi after we count the Bnei Levi? Kol habo l'tzava lavei the goimer. Everyone who's coming to the tzava to serve, their mon der pasuk nor wegen avodas hashir. So what does the pasuk mention? Only about the service of the song, not about taking apart the oren. Only the andere avodas halvim. Not the other ones guarding the Mishkan, not about unloading, loading, etc. Besides carrying, the pasuk also mentions. Since especially the command to sing doesn't say yet, so why did the Torah single out and Dafke feel important to mention these two things over here? And the Torah says, there mentions the song. Why is it necessary? And now the Rebbe is going to ask in Ois Gimel on the second Rashi. The second Rashi says that what is the meaning of Avodas Masa? It means literally, what is Rashi trying to exclude over here? Rebbe says that maybe it's coming to exclude the general Masa that the Levim did was actually when they carried the Mishkan, but then they had to load it on. So maybe we want to say Avodas Masa means literally the actual carrying and not the loading. But the Rebbe is going to ask, why are we talking excluding that? Let's look inside. Gimel. No, Rashi of Avodas Masa. Afterwards, Rashi places himself on Ba'avodas masa unzok. And Rashi says kimashmoy, that it means literally. In Pashto Bavardo Rashi, so simply, what is Rashi coming to caution us over here? What is Rashi answering over here? Since before this Rashi translate, what is avodas avoda? Means avoda la avoda cheres. It's a service for another service. So then one can make a mistake. Unmeinen and think as oich avodas masa. What is avodas masa? Meant avoda lemasa, not avoda of carrying, but avoda for carrying. An avoda tzuli masa, an avoda for carrying. Avodah masa gufa, not masa itself. So one can think it means that. So Rashi therefore cautions you and says, as their taich from avodas masa is kimashmoy, that the meaning, translation of avodas masa means literally, as it seems. Avodah shel masa, the service, the work of carrying, not the serve for carrying, not the other avodah. That's why Rashi has to translate over here. But we need to understand this. How could there even be enter a thought to teach to translate? Avodas masa means avodah lemasa means for the carrying, and Rashi is trying to exclude that. Says doch beloshin haram, as using lashon of the Rabbi Yoel Mizrahi, and he has this ein lemasa avodah acheres. There is no other avodah for masa. Before, for avodas karbonis, there is sheer. But for the avodas masa, that's it. What else is there? Why does Rashi have to tell us that it means the avodas masa, that it means literally? But no, the Rebbe says. Maybe you're going to say, maybe we're coming to exclude that doesn't mean the loading. It means the actual carrying of it. It seems like we could have answered that. What is Rashi trying to exclude here? So, there is room to say, one can as it's made that what we're talking about here is the service of loading of the wagons, not the actual carrying the wagons, but loading the wagons. That's not the actual carrying, nor an avodah lemasa. That's avodah for carrying. The avodah onzuladen the koroshim chulu of the agolos, the service to load the koroshim, etc., onto the wagons. So the masa from the agolos, that will be for the carrying of the agolos. Now, so why would the pasuk all of a sudden over here tell us just about the loading? That wouldn't make really fit. So why are we talking about? We're talking about song, and then we're talking about that song that they serve. That's for the Khan. We do the karbonis, and then we're talking about the loading versus the actual carry. Why would the Torah be mentioning that? Well, there's a reason. Because here the pasuk we would say is coming to bring in two things that have not been discussed. We didn't discuss earlier about song. We also didn't discuss about the loading. So here the pasuk in summation would be talking about the loading and about this song. Und das was the pasuk sagt on di avodah davke do. So why would the Torah instructing about that avodah over here about the loading? Is while in that pasuk, because we're going to say in this verse, kum the Torah meisiv zayin. The Torah is coming to add the avodas v'chavera nit der mot in the friedige psukim, those services that are not mentioned in the earlier verses, which is first avodas shir, the song we didn't have before. Avodas masa means tinas agolis, to loading the carriages. So maybe Rashi says no, it doesn't mean that. It means the actual carrying. But the Rebbe says, in addition, if them was sees schwer zu sagen, it's difficult to say as Rashi kommt shelo sein, tinas ha'agolis, that Rashi is coming to exclude. That we don't mean the loading of the agolis. We don't even know about it. That's later on in the Sedra talks about loading the wagons. So here we're saying that Rashi is telling you that it means the masa and not the tinas. But based on this, is it verstandig lidergisa. We notice on the other hand, Avos learn take Rashi as the pasuk is shoyl the avodah. So why does Rashi learn that the pasuk says no? The Rashi says that it means the masa. It does not mean that. When avodas masa meant kimashmoy, why do we have to say that? If Rashi is later on, Tina Sagol is talking about Achelik from Avodas Bnei Gershon Merori. The loading was a part of the service of Bnei Gershon Merori. So why do we have to exclude it? Avodas Masa means Kemashmoy, and not what? And not the loading. Let the loading be included also. Avodas Masa, the loading and the carrying. So why would Rashi come to exclude it if this is what Rashi is coming to tell us? So the Rebbe will now explain and ask, actually, the beginning of the Parshas Naso. It says, Nosoi es roish b'nei Gershon gam heim. So The Rebbe will first explain what does it mean Gam Heim. But if you see, it says in Naso Yisroish, also them, like the Bnei Kahos. So there's a difference. So by the Bnei Gershom, it says also them. The Bnei Kahos were counted; they are also counted. Gam Heim. But the Bnei Merari doesn't even say at all Gam Heim. It just says Bnei Merari limishpachoisam. Doesn't say count them also. It just says Tifkoi Deisam. Naso Yisroish. The Rebbe brings out from the Maharal Miprog that he translates that the word Gam Heim means that it's not that they are also counted from 30 to 50, the age, because the Gam Heim goes raise their heads, just as Sichos. What it means over here is that they're important. They have an importance. So the Rebbe says, but if they're important, why are they only Gam Heim? Just Naso Yisroish Bnei Gershom. And why does the name already not have it? Let's look inside in the Sicha. Dalet. Vet men das verstehen, behagdim abiyur in Pirush Rashi, with Sichos HaSedra. We have to we'll understand this by introducing the explanation in the Rashi in the beginning of the Sedra. The Pasuk says, Naso Yisroish Bnei Gershom Gam Heim. Count the heads of Gershom, also them. And Rashi says, Kimoishet Tzivisicha Bnei Kahos, Liros Kama Yeshegiu L'Chalal Aveda. Just as I instructed you about the sons of Kahos, that you should see how many of them reached that they can go to the service, so we know how many can do the service. I want you also to count the Bnei Gershom. So what is Rashi trying to tell us over here? The L'Chayda is that moving the Arichas Aloshim from Rashi. It's not understood the lengthy language of Rashi. Lidois kamo yesh egiu l'chlal havoida, to see how many have reached the level of service. Let's count them. What does Rashi have to bring this lengthy on? So the Rebbe says like this: in Tzivui al Bnei Kahos, when Hashem, that's why Rashi is bringing down here. When we talk about the Bnei Kahos in the portion of Bamidbar, versteht man bepashtus zu libvos is given that a minion from Bnei Kahos. Over there we understand very simply why we needed to count them. Mi ben shloishim gomer by ben chamishim shona. Why they needed to be 30 or 50. They Rashi's dort mefarish. Rashi explains over there. Manei mehem esaruyim lavedes masa. You have to count from them those that are fit to working, carrying the load. The Bnei Kahos were carrying on their shoulders the Caleb. So they have to be strong. Behem, ben shloishim shona, ben chamishim shona v'chulu. So that is from 30 to 50. They need to be strong. But over here, what do we need to be the people, the strength? Is so the explains the Maral in his commentary called Gurarye, as Rashi is done. It's also unusual that the Rebbe, the Maral, and Gurarye, but as Rashi is the Oisen to Masbir Zain, that Rashi intends here to explain as Naso Yisroish Bnei Gershom Gam Heim. Rashi wants to tell you, count them too. Meint nit as mizol oich di Bnei Gershom tzelem v'di Bnei Kahos. It doesn't mean that you need to count them just like you counted the Bnei Kahos ben shloishim. Going about ben chamishim shana. So the pasuk is trying to tell you, oh, okay, they too need to be counted shloishim. Well, they're Gam Heim, because it doesn't sit in the words here, because Gam Heim batzitzich zum pasuk la'achrizeh. Because then, but the Gam Heim batzitzich nit zum pasuk la'achrizeh. The Gam Heim doesn't go to the following pasuk, in which they be ben shloishim shana going there. So we're not talking day 2 from shloishim shana. Nor tzufriyah. This is actually applying to the previous psukim, to the previous part of the pasuk. So Naso Yisroish Bnei Gershom Gam Heim meinen dig damit. So what is it meant with it? Nita minya ba'alma. That we're trying to tell you here, don't just count them. Nor aminya was is verbunden with Nisiras Rosh v'chashivus this is a counting which is connected and tied in with raising their heads and importance. As oich, so what we're trying to say, as oich die Gezählte from Bnei Gershon, that also those that were counted from Bnei Gershon, Naso Yisreish, werden aufgehoben damit, was Igiu L'chlal Avoda. They are raised the fact that they have reached to the level included in the service. Und der Riber steht euch bei Bnei Gershon, Naso Yisreish, but it says, raise them, nit bekoid. So basically what Rashi is telling you is that when Rashi was saying this, Rashi is saying, that it will be a raising for them. It will be a Nesiyus Rosh. So, but Apizeh, since we're talking about, it's all about counting them because they reach their age. That man over first days, we need to understand, was the Pasuk Zog Gamheim. Why did it say also them? We're saying they too. So Kos is the one that was counted, and also them. Was das badai? This means, as in the Inyan from Naso Nisiyus Rosh, that when we talk about whose head is raised, Zayin the Bnei Gershon, Tofel, the sons of Gershon are secondary, Gamheim, also them, so the Bnei Kos. So the main is Bnei Kos and Gamheim. L'chayri is the Mekufim from Naso. What is the raising them? Liras Kama Yeshigil L'chlal Avoda, to see how much are reached, as Rashi says, L'chlal Avoda. And that concept of to see how many there are is b'shavet. That's exactly the same by the Bnei Kos and Bnei Gershon. So why are they a Gamheim, also them? That's what we're looking for by the Bnei Gershon too. Noch starker is the kasha. Even stronger is the question. By the Bnei Merori steht nicht Naso es Rosh nor Tifkedoisam. There it says the Bnei Merori Bechlal, it doesn't say, as I mentioned showed before. But the Bnei Merori, it just says by Naso es Rosh Bnei Gershon, it says Gamheim. But when you go down to talk about the Bnei Merori, it says Bnei Merori Mishpachos Tifkedoisam. It doesn't say Naso es Rosh. Not Gamheim. There's no Naso. There's no at all not over there. So when there's nicht Naso es Rosh, nor Tifkedoisam, it just says count them. Chotch oyich bazeh hat gezählt nor ben shloshim goyim ben chamishim. Kol abola tzova lavid. We counted them from 30 to 50. Kol abola tzova lavid, which is the pasuk which is written by Bnei Merori. So they also had the same 30 to 50. So why is that not cheshivas? Why is that not Naso? L'chayre. Oib Naso es Rosh meint in the Nesiyus Rosh. From the Vasigil L'Klal Avoda, if Naso means the raising of the head from those who reach to the be included in the service, Al Gedav Shtei Naso es Rosh by the Bnei Merori. You should have said there too, by Naso es Rosh. So here we see by the Kahos is Naso, by the Gershon is Gamheim, and by Merori it's missing it all. But if the whole idea, what makes them raise them is because of the counting from 30 to 50, why do we make such a difference? There should be, by all of them should be Naso, because they're all by 30 to 50. That's the same by all of them. What is the chilik? That tells us there's some difference here. In Ois Hey, the Rebbe will reject a possible answer that one can say that it is measured by the importance of what the work that they did. The Bnei Kohos, since they were actually carrying the holy kelim of the Mishkan, so by them it says Naso es Rosh, and the Bnei Gershon, who were carrying those items that were at least visible from the inside of the Mishkan, that's why they get Gamheim, and the Bnei Merori, who just carried the Chotzer outside things, therefore they don't even get the Naso at all. Rashi implies that later on. But the Rebbe points to the fact that Rashi says that the reason why they counted them from Naso es Rosh by the Bnei Kos is because they are fit for the work they need to do, not of the type of work. So why is this difference? Let's look inside. Hey, the Chayre wird man gekent masbir sein, it would seem that we could have explained the chiluk zwischen bnei kahos, bnei gershon, and bnei merori, the difference between the kahos, gershon, the sons of Merori, in the inyan from the Sichos Roish, as far as the matter of when do they raise their head, as this is mitzad them unterschied, that is based on the difference zwischen zij amongst them in the sugi masav zevim gedav trogen, the types of load that they needed to carry. The bnei kos was a darfun trogen kodesh hakadoshim, the sons of kos which need to carry the holy of the holiest, the vessels of the Mishkan. The pasuk calls it the kodesh hakadoshim, them orin shulchan, the ark, the table, the menorah, umizbechem mizbechulu, the helix, the chefze hamishkan. Those are the highest, the holiest objects of the Mishkan. Is bazei given der iker und hechster oifum von the Sichos Rosh. So by them, it was the main and the highest level of raising their head. That's Naso, regular. That's the cost, because they carry the most important parts. The Bnei Gershon was euch zeom gehat an avodas hakodesh chulu haniros beveis kodesh hakadoshim. Quoting from the Rashi later on, that what they carried, they also carried a holy service because it was visible. The beams, the kroshim, they were visible in the kodesh hakadoshim. So that's the very important as well. There too there was raising of their head. But since the sanctity of their load is need gekommen zu kedusha samase von bnei kahos, it doesn't reach the sanctity of the load of bnei kahos, is the riber Sichos Rosh. So therefore, when we say Naso Sichos Rosh, nor b'derech tofel, so it comes as secondary gamheim, also them zu bnei kahos. Mashen came b'nei merori, as opposed to b'nei merori. Their load did not include anything that was visible in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Steht bei Zei B'chalal nit Naso Sichos Rosh. That's why it doesn't say Naso at all. So that's how we're going to explain where it says Naso, Gamheim, and others say at all. Und das ist massive. This fits l'chayre mit Pirush Rashi weiter in Parshat V'Aloischa. Also fits with the Rashi says later on in the portion of V'Aloischa. As the Gimel Tnufes was megefind by the Bnei Levi, you find 3 times it says to raise them. So what is this 3 raising of the Leviim? Is Arishono Livnei Kahos. The first one is unique for the Bnei Kahos, Lifishavedas Kodesh Kadosh Malayim, because they serve the service of the holiest of the holiest. As an Ashniya, the second one that you raise, the pasuk talks there is Livnei Gershon. Thus comes from the sons of Gershon. Sha'af Aleim Hoisavedas HaKodesh, because they too had holy work. Needed to base Kodesh Kadoshim, because the Amudim there is still, it's visible in the Kodesh Kadoshim. V'hashlishis is Livnei Merori. The third one is for the sons of Merori, and they didn't have anything, and therefore it's 3 Tnufas. However, there was a noisef of them as we cannot say as Rashi verlost sich do, that Rashi relies here on mevetas vergleichen zu seinem Pirush weiter in Parshat V'Aloischa, that you will compare it to his interpretation later on, the portion of V'Aloischa. Over here, Rashi says avodah, says gamheim. Rashi, as the Rebbe brought down from the that it's because they're also included, that the Rebbe brought down from the Maral. So why would there be? So we can't say that because of the different carrying and the different importance, as Rashi says later on. So that's something different. We can't say that. Is from the Gufa was if Naso Sichos Rosh, but the fact itself. What does Rashi say about when it says Naso Sichos Rosh? By the first time, by the Bnei Kahos, Dr. Rashi. Rashi doesn't talk anything about cheshivas, doesn't talk anything about carrying the Kodesh HaKadoshim. What does Rashi say there? Manoi mehem esa ru'uyim l'avodas maser. Just very simple. Count from them those who are fit to the service of the load. And was is verbunden mit balei koyach. This is connected with people that have koyach. They have the strength to carry. Rashi is mamshich. As Rashi continues, the ones that are younger than 30, their strength has not yet been fulfilled, full. Ben Chamishim, and one who's bigger than Chamishim is Koiche Makish Nata. So then his strength becomes even weaker from here on. So Ufarbint as Bichlal nit mit der Kedusha von their Masse. Rashi doesn't say anything over there that it has to do with the sanctity of their load. So therefore, is verstandig. So therefore, we understand as Loit Pirush Rashi that according to Rashi's commentary, is the Naso Esroish nor mitzad them. Why are we counting? Why are we raising their head? It's only because they're fit to carrying the load, not because they're carrying the Kodesh HaKadoshim, but because they're fit to carry. Is Adru Kush Laducha. So then the question comes back to its place. What's the chilik in them? To carry the load, then you have to be between 30 and 50. So what's the difference? Vision, B'nai Kahos, B'nai Gershom, B'nai Merari. They're all counted between 30 and 50. So, therefore, the Rebbe says, Muzman Zogan, we have to say, as in the minyan for B'nai Levi, Ben Shloishim, Goymer Ben Chamishim Shona, that when we count, the Pasuk says from 30 to 50, then Loit Rashi Faran Tzvei Sugim. According to Rashi, there are two categories of here. Number one, Aleph, Ein Sug Minyan in an oifen from Naso Esroish. One thing is, one category, count them, raise them. That's one category. Who does it apply to mainly? Mainly it applies to the Bnei Kos. Und euch by the Bnei Gershon als Atofu zu Bnei Kos, and also to Bnei Gershon. As secondary to Bnei Kos, Gam Heim, they too. But not by the Bnei Merari, but that doesn't apply to Bnei Merari. That's one category of counting. A category of counting which is unique to Kahos and also a little bit to Bnei Gershon. Then there's another counting which we count all the Leviim, like it's the end, we sum it up, they're minyan based, they're minyan from Leviim, Kol Habo Latzova Lavoida Boil Moyed. This is a pasuk which is written by the Bnei Merari. Kol Habo Latzova Lavoid Miben Shloishim. This is Bnei Merari Mishpachos Beisavesim. Translation of Kol Habo Latzova. So over there is unique, which is for all Avodah, but is not verbunden with Nesius Reish. It doesn't say over here Nesius Reish. It's just counting. Und der minyan, and that counting is do b'shaveh ba'al b'nei Levi. That is actually equal by all b'nei Levi, all included. The ben shloishim gomer v'ad ben chamishim shana was two and avoid. Now we have the explanation. So what is this all about? In Ois Vav, the Rebbe is now going to explain that actually the Naso Yisroish is in relationship to the strength, as Rashi brings out by the Bnei Kahos. It is the amount of strength the Rebbe, that they had to have, and the Bnei Kahos, because they carried it on their shoulders, the Rebbe will explain they needed to be more 30 from 30 to 50 to represent that they're strong enough to carry, because their main function was to carry. By the in the pasuk by the Bnei Kahos, it only says lamasa. By the Gershom, there was a little bit of carrying, and by the Merari, there was almost no carrying. The Rebbe is going to go through the next couple of issues to give us the exact explanation how much koyach it needed to. We'll see that Kahos needed more koyach, and therefore they were the main nosei, the Gershom a little less, and that's why they're Gam Heim, and Merari didn't require that. The Rebbe is going to explain a lot of the technical and just great, ideas, why all this took place. Let's learn inside. Vov. The explanation of this is der minyan b'lashoin Naso Yisroish. When we count something and we use the language of Naso Yisroish, batzeichen the Nesi Yisroish v'chashivus in minyan for the Bali Koyach. That points to the raising of the head and the importance of the minyan of the people who have strength. They're fit to carry. With the Lashon Rashi by the Bnei Kohos, as Rashi uses the language by the Bnei Kohos, count from them those that are fit to carry. So basically, Naso, those who can carry. This is the reason for the difference. As far as it connects by the Nesius Roish over there, it says by the Bnei Kohos, by Bnei Gershon Gamheim, and by Merori in Ganzen, ist all not, zwischen Bnei Kohos, Gershon, Merori. Leider Untersteht zwischen sie, as the difference between them, Bnei Geya to Avedas Masa, the service of carrying, how much carrying they needed to do. By Bnei Kohos, where their mont, nor the Rinyan from Avedas Masa. The Pasuk talks about Bnei Kohos, their Aveda, just talks about carrying. So it means they're all, what's their avodah? The avodah is carrying. Is by their ikar ha'inyan for Naso Yisroish. By them, it's mainly to carry, carrying. So therefore, the main thing by them is Naso Yisroish. Raise the heads of these strong, the people that can carry it. Their main function, their main job consists of avodas masa. So here already it says to serve. Serve is an addition to the masa. And the Rebbe is going to explain later on what this additional service was. But by zei is do an avodah, just to point from the psukim to show you that by kahos is just lamasa. Here it says lavid lamasa. By zei is do an avodah. They have a service oiser besides masa on the river, and therefore is der inyan von Naso Yisroish, was is verbunden mit avodah masa, avodas masa. Therefore, when we say to raise their head, which is connected with the service of carrying, bazei bederach tofel zu bnei kohos. So by them, it's secondary to the bnei kohos because they didn't carry. There wasn't only carrying; they did carrying and avodah. And the far is Rashi do medayik b'lashoinoi. That's why Rashi is very precise in his language when he talks about Naso Bnei Gershon Gamheim. So by Bnei Gershon, Rashi says Kama yesh yigiu l'chlal avodah. Those who are reached, how many of them reached avodah? It doesn't say stam. It doesn't say avodas masa. Zokni by Bnei Kohos avodas masa. By the Bnei Kohos. Over there, the pasuk says, "Monei mehem esaruim lavedas masa by Bnei Kohos," because their job was masa. But we hear by Bnei Gershon when the pasuk says gamheim, and Rashi teaches it. So Rashi says, "Kama yeshigil chalaveda not avedas masa." Uzoknit by Bnei Kohos avedas masa. Why? Because by them there's another. They're not just masa. They have avoda. That's an addition. There is lavoid ula masa. But by name it already states b'chlal needs avodas geber. Over there doesn't say b'chlal. This is the service. Doesn't talk about avodah at all. Not masa and not avodah. It says nor zois mishmeres masom. Mishmeres means their appointment for their carrying. Doesn't mean that they have to carry. It's not their own carrying. They're just to see to it that it's being carried. This haste masom is by saying nit begeder avodah. Their load is not an avodah. It's not that they got to carry it alone. And the Rebbe will explain in later on in the Sicha that although Gershon also didn't carry alone the Yerias, Gershon they put it on the wagons, but the Rebbe will explain that there was more involved in Bakosov, as the Rebbe will explain where the wagons went into. But for now, we're just looking at the languages of the Psukim. So over there, it doesn't say at all, but they need together avodah. Needs they darfen tragen allein bekosev. She's nor was they seinen memunim. They're appointed. Rashi hat shefreir geteicht. Rashi is already translated earlier. Mishmeres minui shah the memunalo. Mishmeres means an appointment that a person is in charge over. So they were in charge of that, but it doesn't mean that they carried was their avodah. They're in charge of masom. They're memunim on masom. This haste. Which means they darfen durchführen, they must accomplish, it's their task, as die Sachen sollen getragen werden, that they need to be carried. Aber nicht Davke durch sie allein because of. It's not they alone. They have to carry the shoulder. And we see that is actually the way it was in actuality. As a Masa is not given because of. It wasn't on the shoulder. They don't have to carry anything. Nor if I go this, with their tzil, weiter in Parsha, it's all in Parsha. That's the B'nai Merari. And like I said, the Rebbe will explain why Gershon is different. If Tafkid is need together from Avodas Maaseh, since their main function is not in the definition of Avodas Maaseh, is Bazei Nito Odinisius Rosh Vachashivus, so they don't have that raising of the head and importance, was is verbunden mit Haruim Lavodas Maaseh, would fit to carry the Maaseh, because they don't have that special significance. So in that case, the Rebbe explains in Zion, if the B'nai Merari didn't have to really carry and they didn't need the koyach, so why would they only from 30 to 50? And the Rebbe says, well, on occasion they would have to carry. Zion. Yet still they count the B'nai Merari they too between 30 and 50 when the person has their strength. Even though they had this style. What was their style? They didn't have to do the work. They had to just see to it that it gets done. They often phone mishmeres appointment. Mishmeres masom, nit avodas masa, not to carry the load. Is das aber nicht shoylel, but that does not preclude as euch bei sie seine gewisse Fallen from Masse because of that. Also by them there were certain situations where they had to carry it by the shoulder. Even though that in generally for their load they had wagons. Is aber given their Masse bis zu the agolos. There was a load till you brought it to the wagons. Euch is done or zu sagen. There's also room to say, as nit alle klei mishmeres masom is given efagolos. Not all of the vessels that they were appointed to carry were on the agolos. There could have been others that they actually had to carry also. And the Rebbe brings down from the Gurari over here in the note. So according to this, we can say, as those made Rashi to shelo zayin b'pirushei. This is Rashi's intent. Rashi means to reject. In his commentary of Avodas Maaseh, he says, Kemashmo, it means what they needed to carry, meaning the load that they carried. But what you can't taichen, you could have translated Avodas Maaseh means Avodah Lemasa, the service to the carrying. Aderech v'mishmeres masom from B'nai Merari, which would be specifically for B'nai Merari. And this pasuk talks about all the Levim. La avodas masa, but similar to the mishmeres masa of B'nai Merari, masa of gufa. It's not just carrying, nor the minu itzubazorgun the minu for masa. Their job is the appointment to make sure that the masa is done, that it's carried, but it's not an avodah. Is Rashi shoel them pirush? Rashi rejects that. Is Rashi shoel them pirush? So Rashi rejects this interpretation while der inyan, because this concept, this idea, the idea of being appointment is nit verbunden mit balei koyach. That has nothing to do, that's not connected to being in charge, to make sure that it happens. Why did it have to be 30 to 50? Ubemele nit mit ben 30 goyim bad ben 50 shana. Und das, was mit zählt, die B'nai Merari, mit Ben Shloishim Goymer, so this that we're counting, B'nai Merari, is to wissen, wie viel seine Voran, was können tragen, because of that we need to know who can carry, even though their job wasn't carrying. Avodas Maaseh, we're talking about who can carry, who can now, as Bazei is given a Maaseh because of. That they too, there was certain carrying when they had to bring it and load it up. So it was a load, and that's what it means, and that's what we need between 30 and 50 strength for those times. But we're not talking about over here. Rashi tells you about their appointment that they would take care, the minui, the mishmeres masom, because for that we didn't need to be between 30 and 50. That's why by them it doesn't say Noses Roish, because their main job was not carrying. But the issue becomes now, so how come with the Bnei Gershon? So while the Bnei Gershon carried, but they also carried on the Agolas. The Rebbe is going to say that the setup, you see that the Bnei Gershon couldn't bring in the wagons into the place of the Mishkan, so they needed to carry it, whereas the Bnei Merari, who were taking the beams apart, they could bring the Agolas right to the entrance, basically right to the Mishkan, and they didn't have to carry so much. So turns out that the Bnei Gershon had more carrying than the Bnei Merari. Let's look inside. We need to ever understand. The Bnei Gershon, Agolas, also the sons of Gershon had wagons for their masa, for their loads. Is mitvos zayin anders with the Bnei Merari. So how are they different from the Bnei Merari? Masa because of Kinal. They also had load because of, I mentioned before, just load and unload. And so the Bnei Gershon had load and unload, but that's equal to the Bnei Merari. So why are they Gershon? Why do they have the Chashivas Gamhe? Was Bazei State. So by them it says Zois Avoidas Mishpres Gershon Gemulamaso. So by the Bnei Merari they were carrying. They were brought before the Psukim. By Gershon were carrying. By Bnei there's no masa there. By Zei is masa Trogn Bekosev given an Avodah. And over there we call that an Avodah. And by the Bnei Merari it doesn't say at all that it was maso. Okay, there was maso, it needed to be. But the Pasuk doesn't say by the Bnei Merari that there was a Avodah of carrying. And by the Bnei Gershon, it says clearly that there was a masa. But why would they be carrying more than the Bnei Merari? Why would the Bnei Gershon be carrying more than Bnei Merari? Is there being in them? So this is the explanation. L'chayr is moving. L'chayr is understood. As the avodas from Gershon Merari by Akamas Pirik HaMishkan zayin getan geworden al Seder. How did the service? How did it work that Gershon and Merari, when they raised the Mishkan, when they took it apart, it went in order? What happened? Früher haben die Bnei Gershon voneinander genommen dem Chelik from Mishkan was shaykh zu their Tafkid. First, the sons of Gershon, they took apart the portion of the Mishkan which relates to their mission. The Kala Chotzer, that's the curtain of the Chotzer. Yiriyos, that's the covers. Chulu. V'chol badekt und hanging of the Karash Amudim, that covered, and they were hanging over the beams and the posts. Und sie gleich angeladen auf sie Ragolas, and immediately they loaded them on their wagons. Und erst noch, and afterwards, when they finished, the Bnei Merari started their work. To take apart the posts of the Chotzer, the Karshal Mixon, the beams of the Mishkan, and then the Bnei Merari would load them on their Agolas. So the reverse took place, similar to this, when they raised the Mishkan. First, the Bnei Merari took down the beams and the posts from their carriages, and they raised them. And then the Bnei Gershon took down the covers and the curtains from Zeira Golis, the clothing for the Chotzer, and the cover the Yiriyos for the covering the Mishkan, from Zeira Golis from their carriages, and then they placed the What the Rebbe is coming to sell it, they're not going to say, well, first they took everything apart and left it on the floor, and then they both moved in. But it worked with a seder. It worked organized. First, when they took it apart, Gershon came in, did his part, took out the outer parts, and then Gershon, Merari moved in, took the inner part. Same thing in the reverse. When they stood it up, Merari first stood up the outer parts, and then Bnei Gershon, they went and they did the covers on that. Since that was the Seder, so therefore it turns out, as when the Bnei Gershon are abgenommen the Yiris from Mishkan, when the Bnei Gershon took the Yiris down from the Mishkan, and also on the Kala Chotzer from the Amudim, and they removed the coverings of the Chotzer from the posts, so the posts of the Chotzer were still standing on their place. So how could they carry from the Mishkan the Yiris to the wagons? They must carry it on the shoulder. The entire area from Mishkan, from the courtyard of the Mishkan, to outside of the courtyard. The Agolos the Agolos didn't fit in between the Amudim of the Chotzer, these non to Mishkan, so they couldn't bring it to the Mishkan. So they had to carry it when they took it off the Mishkan, always outside to where the wagons were stationed, outside of the Chotzer. The Riber hastes bazei on Avedas Masa. That's what that's considered an Avedas carry. Mashake by Bnei Merori, as opposed to Bnei Merori, is doch nicht gewenken hechrech. They didn't have to, as they sollen allein darfen trocken the Kroshim Chulu, aggressive shetach, that they should need to carry by themselves a greater area. Hayosem gekent zubringen the Agolos gleich leben die Karsha Mishkan. They can bring it next to the beams of the Mishkan. Azoi, as they have not gedarf trocken, so unload of the Agolos. All what they had to do is to carry it to load onto the carriages. And based on this idea that the Rebbe suggests over here, how it was done, in them, there's an additional now explanation, and this was that Naso Yesroish by Bnei Gershon is not Gamheim. Here we call it Gamheim, also them. Atofel to the Bnei Kos, they're secondary to the Bnei Kos. As this is not just because they have two things. They have Masa, carrying, and Lavid, as the Rebbe said before. But by Bnei Kos, it just says Masa. And over here, by the Bnei Gershon, it says also Lavid Ula Masa. Besides that, also their load, Gufa. The Masa was them Gemus Trog Makosef, that load that they needed to carry on the shoulder is not given bis the Agolos Mechutz L'Chotzer. That only was for the distance to the Agolos that were outside of the courtyard. Mashenka, but the Bnei Kohos, as opposed to Bnei Kohos, they had no carry. It's not because if you saw it was only they carried the shoulder, so they were totally carrying. But over here, it wasn't really fully carrying; it was only a little bit carrying. The Rebbe said, "Kama protim en al nal, zaden ober nor l'chayre." Many of the details, it appears so. It says the Seder Hakomas HaMishkan, the order, the way it actually Mishkan was raised, was the Fun Izech move on Seder Pirik HaMishkan. We can learn from there how they took it apart. Which is the reverse, the order from the way they set it up, is Meforish Meparshis Pekudei. That says in the portion of Pekudei, as Meheptom Mide Adonim Kroshim, that you start with the sockets and you put the beams and it's only at the end that you take off the chotzer. So basically, so that would really mean that the chotzer comes down first. And if the chotzer comes down first, this whole idea that you bring over the carriage over there, so they can technically bring first because it gets set up last. So then actually the Bnei Gershon could bring the carriage all the way to the Chotzer. But over either event, Bnei Gershon gehat an aveda begufam, yes yisera Bnei Merori. They still had a greater work with their body more than Bnei Merori. From the Yiriyas, Michses, Misachim v'Kloim, because these coverings and the top coverings and the curtains of the chotzer, or there are opnemen, so they needed to put it on or take it down. Then the kroshim v'amudim zayin gishtanen. the pillars were standing, so they had to take it off from a difficult position. Kletter Neuben, they had to climb on top. Trogna Hindi Irias, to carry the Irias there. Hoben dort zu Tommy de Lois, they needed to deal with the different hooks. Meisorim and the strings, v'chulu, they had a lot more intricate details over there. So their masa, their load, was greater, even if we don't accept the suggestion of before the Rebbe said. So we see that the Bnei Gershon had more masa than the Bnei Merari, and that's why with them it's Gam Haim, and the Avodas Masa is not mentioned by the Bnei Merari. So now the Rebbe goes back and explains why Rashi chose to say these two avodas b'shir mitzaltayim v'kinorid. But the issue becomes, we say mi ben shloishim shona by Bnei Gershon, it says la'avodu lamasa. The whole thing we said now, lamasa, you need somebody strong. So we understand why we need ben shloishim ad chamishim, between 30 and 50. But the pasuk says la'avod ulemasa. So the masa we understand, but the la'avod, why does the la'avod have to be between 30 and 50? But one could explain that the reason we need that is because even if you don't carry but la'avod to bring it on, to put it on, that's also is a strenuous work. But the question would become, why shira, which is a avoida for another avoida, why do we need ben shloishim to ben chamishim between 30 and 50? What is there a big deal about the thing that we need that? So that's why Rashi says over here these two instruments, because they require koyach. Let's see inside. Rashi, based on the above, will understand the explanation of Rashi. Say that is the song which is with the cymbals and the harps. Because now we're going to explain that. Because based on what we said before, that Avodas Masa represents the Naso, the Chashivas, the carrying. Kos had all carrying. Gershon had more carrying than Merari had less carrying. But according to that, and we needed to have between 30 and 50 for that koyach, the balder minyan ben shloishim gomer bale koyach is verbunden, is connected with masa, is the last of the load. Ibazreif avos werden in the minyan ben shloishim gomer from Bnei Gershon. So why, when we count ben shloishim Bnei Gershon, also the avodah is nit masa nor lavid masa. We said that's by the Bnei Kos, it just says masa, but by Bnei Gershon it says lavid ula masa. And still, we need to be between 30 and 50. Why the avoda over there? We don't need to be 30 to 50. The pashtus kemen zogen. So we could say, as labed made the avoda from piruk vakomas hamishkon. It is the service of undoing, dismantling, and raising of the mishkan, and inas hagolas and loading the hagolas. So you also need somebody with strength. That's why for 30 to 50. Let it be takel. Let it be nitazabal koich v'avedas masa. Not as much strength that you need to carry it. The far past it of them that inyan for Naso Yisroish. You can't just call him Naso Yisroish. It's only Gamheim, but it's Naso Yisroish. Abazeiz as petzela nesi Yisroish v'chashivas. That it's especially chashivas, and that's why by Merari, who also had to put it on, you needed koich, but we can't say nesi Yisroish. But you can say you still need to be strength. That's why 30 to 50, it doesn't match up to the other one, but we can understand it. So it doesn't get the Siyas Rosh. It's not called Nasos Rosh, but yet you have to be 30 to 50. The Farzan Zedavki for the Megillah, and that's why you need them specifically from the age of Ben Shloishim ad Chamishim, from 30 to 50. And the Koyach Odom is B'Tokfa. The person's strength is in its strength. It's in its full force. Now, if the pasuk sums it everything up, it says Kol habo lavoid avoidas avoida. What does it mean? Lavoid avoidas avoida. It means to sing to the Levi. Was meant avoida lavoida cheres shir. It means the service to the other avoida, to the song which is the avoida for the karbonis. Wird schwer. The question is, for was is Shir Shaykh Davke to dem Gil von Balei Koyach? Why is a song applicable specifically to the age of Balei Koyach? The Riber Zocht Rashi who Ashir b'mitzoltayim v'kineris. That's why Rashi says that's the song of the cymbals and the harps. When he's mashbit nevolim, and he does not mention, he misses out, he takes out nevolim, und dem shir b'peh bechlal, and doesn't mention anything about singing with your mouth. Von dem was avodah shir steht in the posik is Rashi medayik. From the fact that we're talking about the service of a song is written in this posik, Rashi derives from this, Rashi learns from that, as do retzich wegen azar sukshir, that here we're talking about what kind of a song was medarv der zu haben balei koyach, that we require people of strength. What is the requirement? That is the song that you play with cymbals and the harps. That needs koyach. Mozeir shir is verbunden mit asiya melechas yad. That's something to do. You play, you use. It's a string instrument. Or banging the cymbals, using your hands. Mit aggressor anstrengung, and that takes a greater effort. By novel, what is the novel? It's from Loshen novel yayin, which means a jug of water. Was der koil shira? How is the sound of the song? Kum durch blosen. It comes when you blow. It's a blowing instrument. Mit moil umekolskein stam shira, for sure. Just singing is as nit verbunden mit azar anstrengung. That's not tied to such effort. So when you do things with your mouth, does not require so much as effort as you put with your hands, and that's why Rashi knows that the pasuk puts it over here together with the balei koyach, that you have to be from 30 to 50. It must mean a strenuous kind of singing, which is the mitzoltayim, and which is the cymbals, and the harp, which are both hand associated. So the Rebbe explained in Ois Yud that mit is euch move on. Now we also understand was avodas steht dafki in dem posuk beim Sefer Minyan. Why does it say avoda in this posuk when we finished the counting and we're summing up all the numbers? We say the avoda, because telling the pasuk by Msoiv Sachakol for Minyan, when the pasuk places, the Torah places this verse at the end and at the sum of the number Azmat Nor Gitzel Dimnei Levi Miben Shloishim Gomer, that we only counted those from 30. Kolabol avoida vavoidas masa boil moyed. We counted those who come to do the avoidas avoida and avoidas masne moyed. Build their pasuk klormach, and the pasuk wants to clarify, make it very clear, as those was their minyan is given by grenis to them gildavke. That the fact that this counting has been limited to this age specifically of 30 to 50 is a snort to leave the tzvei inyonim. It's only for these two matters. Avoidas avoida, which is the shir mitzoltai v'kineris, the serving of the service, which is the song in the cymbals and the harps, and also avodas masa, and for carrying. Unit to leave the andere avodas, and not for the other services for Bnei Levi, such as the piruk v'akomas hamishkon, to undo and to raise the mishkan, and tinas agolos, lorid agolos. That's something that could be done. Was kenne getan werden euch noch ben 50 schon. That can be done also after 50. Rashi is auch befeirish in the parashas Ba'aloischa. Then in Rashi says that after he turns 50, he doesn't serve anymore. Avodas masa bekosef, he doesn't carry on his shoulder. But he does return to closing the gates, and to sing, and to load the wagons. It's clearly to load the wagons. Or lishmer mishmeres, to guard the guard, lachanois soviv oil, to camp around the oil, and to raise and to bring down at the time of the travel. So there, in the Farish, they continue work. So therefore, the pasuk says the only reason why we need the summation, why we need to 30 to 50, is for the song, which has been mitzaltai mikinot, it's a hard job, and also for the masa, the carrying, the kosif, that major job. That's why it needed to be from 30 to 50. Some of the other work can be done after 50 as well, as Rashi says over here. And the Rebbe Noishud Aleph says, so we have now a tremendous chiddush, because it turns out that these two parts of the song, which is Mitzoltaim and Kinoides, we say clearly that we need to be between 30 and 50. So when Rashi says over there that he does go back, Loshir, he's talking about, but not sing with your mouth, sing benevel, but not the Mitzoltaim, because over here it was limited to that. And also it comes out that in the Beis HaMikdash, not only by the Mishkan, after 50, you can't, once you reach the age of 50, there should be a psul. Let's look inside. Yudalef. Like this, it also comes a novelty in the Inyanim Mufloim Al Derech Halacha Rashi, in the wondrous matters which is according to Halacha that is in the Rashi. Api Hanal as Ashir b'mitzotayim v'kineris is not at ben 50 shono, that the song mitzotayim v'kineris can only be until 50 years old. Darf men sagen, so we have to say, as was Rashi zogt, choizer hu v'loshir, that he could return after 50, can't do that, but he could go to shir. Meintes shir b'peh b'nevel, because peh b'nevel are not included in that. Aber nit shir b'mitzotayim v'kineris, but he can't continue with mitzotayim, with the cymbals and the harps. So derech hapshat is normally ben shloshim v'gomer ba'ad b'chamishim shana. Can only do it between 30 and 50, as Rashi said, that is the shir avodas avodim ben chamish ben shloshim to ben chamishim. In addition, another thing, oich bald as the time of them is bal noch ben chamishim shana koich makrish matu. Since the reason why you cannot do after 50 is because Rashi brought down that after 50 years the person's koyach starts to degrade, becomes weaker. And singing using this instrument of the cymbal and the harps is difficult. So we have no reason to make a difference in them. That's a physical, practical thing that a person cannot do it at that time. So why should it be a difference between the Mishkan and the Mikdash? So from the perspective of Pshuta Mikra, is shonim absolim leviya ichledoris. Years would also, in the future generation, not only by the Mishkan, not only by the Bnei Levi, that they were counted over there, because this represents a physical matter of strength, and therefore, for later generations, since they don't have the strength after 50, that the Levim should not be able to do the shear. But you can say that it's not a physical part that they don't have the koyach. Maybe the Torah just says for shear we need between 30 and 50, but that was only for the generation when they counted them at that time. But for later on, Levim, even after 50, can continue to sing everything, and there's no limitations for that. Finally, the Rebbe is going to explain in Oishid Beis, the Yenu Shel Torah Shebepirush Rashi, for the Yenu Shel Torah, the Rebbe is going to explain a piece of the Likutei Torah and the Parsha. The Alter Rebbe brings the Lashonos that Bnei Gershom and by Bnei Kos, Bnei Gershom says Naso Yisroish. He says that's a level of halicha, b'ligvul. But what about Bnei Merori? They're oimdim. But the Rebbe asks, but everybody is The whole alicha in the Mishkan was a alicha b'ligvul. The Rebbe explains there's three madregas. Let's look inside. Based on the above explanation about the difference between Bnei Kos, Gershon, and Merori, we have an additional explanation. And that was the Alter Rebbe Zok in the Minyan, the matter that the Alter Rebbe says about it in Likutei in the Antike Sedra, in the Likutei this week's portion. The Alter Rebbe is Mavayeh, the Alter Rebbe explains the Mechiluk, Bnei Kos, Gershon, and Merori, the difference between Gershon, Kos, and Merori, in the Inyan from the Sichos Reish, in the idea of raising the head. When we say Naso, that means that points to the service of going in an unlimited way. Raise the head to go to the level of Ratzon Naso to go to the level of Ratzon. So he says that Bnei Kos, Bnei Gershon, the sons of Kos and Gershon are the two dargis and Efanim and Hiluch. They are the two levels and ways, the way you travel. The Maila Lamata, from above to below, Maila from below to above. When the Riber stayed Bazei, Naso Yisroish, that's why it says Naso Yisroish, because they go to the higher level. Over Bnei Merori, Zainin B'chinas Oimdim. The Bnei Merori are on the level of Oimdim. V'mizet, Azei Raved is given the Masa Kroshim, that their service was the load of the Kroshim, was Zainin Atzi Shitim Oimdim. They are standing, so they represent level of standing, not Aliyah Halicha. My time, for that reason, the state was they need Naso Yisroish. That's why by them it doesn't say Naso Yisroish, because they didn't have the Alicha B'ligvul, didn't have the Alicha to the level of Keseris. They move on. But it's not understood. The Gans and it's Midbar. But the entire journey of the desert is in Yonah Given Tzofton, the Avodah von Hilo Ba'idin. That, what was it all about? It was to accomplish that service of Hiluch Ba'idin. How could we say that this service is not by the sons of Merari? But based on the above, as Naso Yisroish is verbunden mit Avodas Masse, that we're saying that Naso Yisroish is mainly considered with the carrying of the load. Kemen Zogun. They also carried it. As Oich by the Bnei Merori is given Davide from Hiluch B'ligvul, that they also had the level of B'ligvul, Naso Yisroish, they also know that Hiluch is verbunden, but by them it was connected with Bechinas Agolis. In other words, they carried it, but they didn't carry it themselves, they didn't get Makosif, they carried the Agolis. Through Velchan Davidas Masav, by Bnei Merori, through which the Avodas Masav was accomplished with Bnei Merori. So on the simple level, they didn't carry, but in the end they carried also. They carried through the Agolas. The Bir was that. What's the explanation? This in the Avodah von Hiluch B'ligvul, Zayin Dod Rayin Yonah. The three aspects in this unlimited move. Aleph, the Etzem Hiluch B'ligvul is the Avel Hashem for Nefesh HaBahamis Nochir Biru. What is the essence of this unlimited move? That's the love of Hashem from the animal soul. After it has been sorted out. Since the root of the animal soul comes from the world of Toyu, from the world of chaos, which is higher than the root of the godly soul, is dafki nirdo the Rav Tfuz. So specifically in that Nefesh HaBahamis, there is this concept of this Rav Tfuz that is b'kercher, the Ava B'ligvul, the love, the limitless love. Basically, the Nefesh HaBahamis, when you turn it around, because of its high source, pulls to the highest level. Rav Tfuz, a lot of grain. When an ox goes wild, it doesn't do anything, it damages. But when you can harness the ox, you'll get a lot more than you harness the tame animal. So when you harness the Nefesh HaBahamis, you sort it out, you go to a much higher level. Then you get the love of believable base, then you have the intention of it, the kavanah from the middle of believable. But when you get the Nefesh HaBahamis to go believable, intent as zayin acharecha narutza, we will run after you, which means to include the Nefesh Elikis. Osharabim. Azur, the Nefesh Elikis, it's the plural. That also the godly soul from Tikkun, so Zayin in that Nufum, that too should be in that movement into being a limited way. It should slap along with the Nefesh Bahamis. Gimel, no, the Misvert Evgiton the Hill of Buligul Nefesh Elikis, but after it's already been accomplished, the unlimited move of the Nefesh Elikis, Acharecha Merutza, with both the Nefesh Bahamis pulled along the Nefesh Elikis, where the Nefesh Elikis is Allah, the Nefesh Elikis is elevated to Amitis Shorsho Mekoira, to its true root and source, which is something unique only, it's even higher than the Nefesh Bahamis, the source of the Nefesh Bahamis, the source of the Nefesh Bahamis. Heviani, Loshin Yochid, just me, Hamelech Hadorov. These three levels, the lowest level, it starts with the Nefesh Bahamis, that's Merori. The Nefesh Elikis, that's Gershon. The Haviyani Melech Hadorov, that's Kahos. Dosi der Chiluk, Tzuvishun de Bnei Kahos, Gershon Merori, the difference between Kahos, Gershon Merori. By the Bnei Merori state nor Mishmeres Masom. It doesn't say about the load. But Etzem Amasa is given of the Agolos. The load itself is the Agolos. Unoich Zer Masa Bekosov is the Avodah. That which they do because we don't call that Avodah. So I've explained before that the load unloaded they need to be 30 to 50, but that's not Masa. It's only Avodas Zeish Mishmeres Masom. In Avodah Ruchnis Meites, what does it mean in the spiritual context? Azer Hilu B'li Gvul is given nor in Nefesh HaBahamis B'chinas Agolos. They were only going with the Agolos, the outside. The Agolos, there is where they were Naso, they were carrying them. But they didn't accomplish it themselves in Nefesh Elikis. The godly soul. That's why there's no Naso over there. It's only on the Agolos. Rabbi wants to add, but still there was some Hiluch there through the Agolos. By Bnei Gershon is given Acharecha Narutza. Over there, run after you, the Hiluch B'Ligvul, Sayin Nefesh HaBahamis, Masa B'Agolis, Sayin Nefesh Elikis. Also, by the Bnei Gershon does say, Zois Avodas Gemul Masa. They did Masa too. So they had both. But the Bnei Kahos is given Noch Hecher. Over there was even higher. The king brought me to his room. The Hiluch B'Ligvul, it's Adam Shodish Amit for Nefesh Elikis. The unlimited journey, because of the true root from the godly soul, was Hotkin Shaychesnis to Nefesh HaBahamis Agolos, which has no connection. It's beyond, has no connection to Agolos. And the Faris, the Iker Masezeri given. That's why. What was their main load? Their Oren, which is the Torah. Carried other things also, but the main thing was the Torah. While the Inyan from Haviyane Melech Hadorov is when did it accomplish? The king brings me to his room, into his place where it's just an Nefesh Elikis in the highest level. This was accomplished with Matan Torah in the festival of Shavuos. This is Sichos Shabbos Parshas Naso, Tavshin Chav Hei, and Tavshin Lamed Aleph.